China, the two biggest economies in the world. President Trump is back in Washington after his highly anticipated face-to-face meeting with China's president that happened in South Korea. President Trump says they reached agreements on some economic issues. The president says the U.S. will lower tariffs on China, effective immediately, and the president says China will step up efforts to crack down on fentanyl production. The two leaders did not agree to a larger trade deal, but President Trump is still very happy with the outcome.
I thought it was an amazing meeting. I guess on the scale from 0 to 10, with 10 being the best, I would say the meeting was a 12.
Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba and NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans is here. Monica, I'll start with you. What is the White House saying about next steps in trade talks? Because, again, they didn't come up with a whole new trade deal.
That's right, Kate, and they didn't sign anything to that effect either. So there was nothing formal that was completely agreed to or finalized here. But the sense from the White House is that they now can be on the path toward doing that. They're going to continue this discussion, and they're essentially going to declare a truce in this trade war. They're going to say that for the next year, they're going to work on a lot of different issues, but they're going to pledge to at least lower the tariff rate for China, for instance, from 57% to 47% because of some of the pledges that China has made on cracking down on fentanyl. For instance, that was a big priority for President Trump and something that the U.S. went into wanting to secure. And they say again that they have received China's assurances on this, but they'll have to see if they actually follow through on it. And then when it comes to some of these other areas, again, an actual formalized trade deal did not come out of this, but they believe that they could now have the proper negotiations to do that. And we know there are going to be some future meetings with President Trump saying he is expected to travel to China in April of next year, and President Xi will be in the U.S. for the G20 at some point next fall. Kate.
Thank you, Monica. Let me turn to Christine. We've had months of back and forth about what's going to happen with China and how high the tariffs are going to be or how low they're going to. So now it seems like the U.S. is going to lower tariffs on Chinese goods coming into this country. What does that mean?
Look, just 2 weeks ago, the president had threatened another 100% tariff on China. So now this is backing off that threat and lowering tariffs a little bit. But its context is so important. Lowering them to 47%, that still is, really a big number here. So it gives a little bit of breathing space, I think, for importers, companies, American companies that are importing goods from China. It lowers some of their costs a little bit here. Does it move the needle on consumer prices? It's just too soon to know.
And the other thing that stood out, I don't know if we've mentioned it already, is that soybean farmers here in the U.S. will be able to sell at least some of their product to China.
Yeah, and this had been a big market for American soybean farmers, and suddenly it just evaporated. That was the Chinese showing its leverage against the U.S. economy. They essentially boycotted American soybeans, and now they've said they bought 12 million metric tons as a show of good faith, and then they're promising now 25 million a year for the next 3 years. That is some progress. Again, many of these soybeans that the United States used to sell to China was getting in from Mexico or from Brazil and Argentina, so that was a loss of a market. The American Soybean Association says they hope that's a floor. They want them to buy even more soybeans.
Yeah, okay. Monica, back to you. President Trump did not talk about TikTok, even though we all expected there might be some progress made on TikTok. What do we know?
Well, the Treasury Secretary said that this is something where they believe that Chinese officials have signed off on the plan that the U.S. does have for the very popular social media platform, which is essentially at some point to change the ownership, which is currently Chinese ownership, to U.S. ownership, where those different U.S. investors and stakeholders in this who would come together would purchase it. But again, that has not been finalized. That is the plan. That is what they hope to do. But the U.S. still needs to finalize that deal that they, of course, needed buy-in from the Chinese in order to go forward with that, which they claim they now have.
All right, Monica Alba at the White House, Christine Romans here. Thank you so much. Today is day 30 of the federal government.
Of course, it wouldn't be a Trump trip overseas.
Fate of federal food assistance that is set to expire this weekend. The USDA says money for SNAP benefits.
And after the Prime Minister made Trump feel so comfortable, he thought it was only only fair
Saturday, meaning that nearly 42 million Americans who rely on that program could go hungry. A federal judge in Boston heard arguments today on a case brought by 25 states and Washington, D.C. They're seeking to stop the Trump administration from freezing that funding for those SNAP benefits. Let's bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona. Melanie, walk us through what happened in that court case today.
Yeah, so the judge did not issue a ruling from the bench, but she did say that she plans to issue a ruling before the end of the day. And during that hearing, Democrats argued that the Trump administration has an obligation to spend a contingency fund specifically for SNAP in order to continue paying benefits even during the shutdown. The Trump administration, though, argued before the judge that they cannot use those contingency funds because this is a manufactured crisis by Democrats in their words, and so this doesn't meet the criteria. But the judge seemed to side with Democrats, signaling that she finds it hard to believe that this doesn't rise to the level of emergency, but we'll see what she has to say in her official ruling later today.
And Melanie, Vice President Vance took questions outside the White House on the shutdown today. He was asked about why the administration could not move money around to fund SNAP or to pay other federal workers like it said it would for the military. What did he say?
Vice President Vance defended how President Trump has handled this shutdown, saying he's trying to make it as painless as possible, and that even though they are not planning to pay SNAP funds, they have moved money around in order to pay the troops tomorrow when they're set to get another paycheck. Here's a little bit more of what Vance had to say.
The unfortunate reality, and we're starting to see this with our aviation industry, we're going to find out the hard way with SNAP benefits. The American people are already suffering, and the suffering is going to get a lot worse. Not because the President of the United States has failed to make the shutdown painless. He's tried to do everything that he can to make it as unpainless as possible.
Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the pressure is growing on lawmakers to try to come to the table and finally solve this issue. Of course, the pain of the shutdown only escalating, but so far all we're seeing is bipartisan talks amongst the rank and file members, not at the leadership level. That's potentially when we'll actually see a real breakthrough.
All right,
Kate.
Melanie Zanona, keep us posted. Thank you. We are keeping a close eye on Hurricane Melissa. It's making its way toward Bermuda.